Hello, welcome, or perhaps my condolences for stumbling upon the Shadow Radio, a place where, once you've listened, you will never forget, even if you wanted to. Here, we share stories of darkness, chilling secrets, and things that, if you knew too much about, might not be so good for you. But since you're already here, don't just stand silently in the shadows watching. Hit that subscribe button right now, or else we might have to visit you in your dreams tonight. Just to remind you that the Shadow Radio is still waiting for you. If you feel chills down your spine or your heart racing faster than usual, like this video and leave a comment to tell us how you feel. Because, the darkness needs to be fed too. And every like, every subscribe makes it stronger, strong enough to keep existing and to take you deeper into this world with no escape. Shadow Radio, where the darkness is always waiting for your return. Robert Matthews had always been a quiet man. After retiring from his job as an accountant in Chicago, he moved with his wife Mary to a small town in Wisconsin, hoping to spend the rest of his life reading old books, drinking black coffee by the window, and browsing antique stores on weekends. Mary, 2 years younger than him, shared the same love for timeless things. She liked collecting porcelain teacups, glass bottles with faded labels, and kitchen utensils from the early 1900s. But Robert's passion was radios, not modern Bluetooth speakers or sleek FM receivers, but real, heavy, dusty radios made of solid wood and brass dot. It was a Sunday morning in early October, when the cold breeze carried with it the scent of dry leaves and pine resin. Robert and Mary drove down to the old flea market near Highway 14, hoping to find something special to decorate their living room. They walked hand in hand through narrow aisles, lined with rusty tools, cracked mirrors, and wobbly tables. That's when he saw Dot sitting on a crooked shelf behind a stack of yellowing newspapers was a radio unlike any other he had owned. Its casing was a deep mahogany brown, carved with thin vertical ridges along the sides. The knobs were brass, though tarnished by time, and the mesh covering the speakers was darkened, giving it an aura of dignity, or, to Mary, a slightly unsettling presence. Above the dial, the brand label was faded, but Robert could still make out the words, Everett & Sons, 1942. His heart skipped a beat. Radios from the early 1940s were extremely rare, especially those still intact. Mary, look at this beauty, he whispered, brushing his fingers along the wood. A shiver ran down his spine, and for a second, he felt like something inside the radio shivered with him. Mary frowned. It feels cold, even under the sun. Robert laughed softly. It's just the wood, darling. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind them. An old man with sunken eyes and bony fingers stepped out from behind a curtain made of stained bedsheets. His voice croaked like gravel under tires. You're interested in the radio? He asked, wiping his hands on a rag that looked dirtier than his shirt. Yes, sir. How much for it? Robert replied, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. The old man looked at Robert, then at Mary. His eyes lingered on her for a second too long, and his thin lips curled into what was neither a smile nor a frown. For you, $50. Robert's eyes widened. $50 was a ridiculous price for a 1942 Everett & Sons radio in this condition. Is it working? Mary asked. The old man nodded slowly, his neck creaking with emotion. It works when it wants to. Robert chuckled. Well, let's see if it wants to work for me. As he reached for his wallet, the old man placed his hand on the radio, almost protectively. His eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. You should know. It belonged to a man who, people say he was cursed. He used to sit alone in his house, listening to voices all night. And when they found him, he was still sitting in front of it, dead. Mary squeezed Robert's arm. Maybe we shouldn't, but Robert had already handed over the $50 bill. Stories are just stories, dear. The old man took the money with trembling fingers, then leaned closer to Robert, his breath smelling of rotting leaves and something sour. If you hear them, don't answer. Before either of them could ask what he meant, he disappeared behind the curtain. Mary felt a chill crawl up her spine. She wanted to leave as fast as possible, but Robert was too busy admiring his new treasure, carefully carrying it back to their car. On the way home, Mary sat in silence, glancing at the radio through the rear-view mirror as if expecting it to twitch or blink. Robert hummed happily, imagining how it would look on the oak cabinet next to his armchair. That evening, after a dinner of roast chicken and pumpkin soup, Robert brought the radio into the living room. He dusted it carefully with a dry cloth, polished the knobs with brass cleaner, and plugged it into the socket with shaking hands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dial lit up with a dim orange glow, and the radio crackled to life, filling the room with a low, pleasant hum. Mary sat on the couch, arms folded tightly. "I don't like that thing, Rob." Robert turned the knob, switching through dead static until a soft jazz tune filled the room. He closed his eyes and smiled. "It's perfect." But as he sat there, lost in the saxophone's moaning melody, Mary noticed something strange. Behind the music, there was a faint, rhythmic whisper, like someone breathing into a microphone. From far away. She tried to tell Robert, but he waved her off, too absorbed in his joy. That night, as they lay in bed, Mary stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and somewhere in the house, a clock ticked louder than usual. Just before drifting into uneasy sleep, she thought she heard a faint whisper coming from the living room. "I see you." She shook her head, telling herself it was her imagination. But deep down, a cold dread pooled in her stomach. Tomorrow. She decided she would tell Robert to return the radio, but tomorrow would come with darker whispers. The next morning came gray and silent. Mary woke to the sound of birds tapping against the window, but even their chirps felt muted, as if the house itself had swallowed their songs. Robert was already up, whistling softly as he brewed coffee. In the kitchen, the smell of roasted beans mixed with the scent of autumn air drifting in through the cracked window. She found him sitting in his armchair, the radio playing an old country ballad. His eyes were distant, half closed, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Mary wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Morning, Rob," she said, her voice tight. He blinked and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time that day. "Morning, dear. Sleep well?" Mary hesitated, then shook her head. "I kept hearing whispers last night." Robert laughed, but the sound felt forced. "It's probably just the wind, love. This house is old." She glanced at the radio. The brass knobs were glinting in the dim light, almost like tiny eyes watching her. "Can you turn that off for a while?" He frowned. "Why? It's just music." "Please." With a sigh, he switched it off. The room immediately felt colder, emptier. Mary shivered, though she didn't know why. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Robert spent most of his time polishing the radio, inspecting its wiring, tuning it to random frequencies to see how well it could catch stations. Mary busied herself in the garden, trying to keep her mind off the unease gnawing at her chest. That night, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees outside like mourning spirits. Mary woke with a start sometime after midnight. The house was pitch black, except for a thin line of silver moonlight leaking through the curtains. Beside her, Robert was snoring softly. Then she heard it thud at first. She thought it was the radio playing music again. But as her ears adjusted, she realized it wasn't music at all, It was a voice. A thin, rasping whisper, curling through the hallway and under their bedroom door. Her breath caught in her throat as she strained to hear. I see you. I know what you did. I see you. I know what you did. Each phrase slithered into the next, becoming almost melodic in its repetition. Mary felt her skin crawl. She reached out with a trembling hand and shook Robert's shoulder. Rob, wake up, he groaned, rubbing his eyes. What is it? Why are you? Listen, she hissed. They sat there in silence, the whispering seeping into their room like a cold fog. Robert frowned and swung his legs over the bed, grabbing his robe. It's probably just static, he muttered, though his voice trembled slightly. He opened the bedroom door, and the whispering grew louder, clearer. I see you. I know what you did. Together, they crept down the dark hallway. The living room was bathed in the pale glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. On the shelf, the radio's dial was glowing softly, though neither of them remembered turning it on. The air felt heavy, pressing down on their lungs. Robert reached out and turned the knob to shut it off. The voice stopped instantly, replaced by silence so deep it roared in Mary's ears. She swallowed, her throat dry. Did you hear what it was saying? Robert shook his head. Just static, Mary, that's all. No, she whispered. It was saying, I see you. I know what you did. He stared at her, his face pale in the dim light. Don't be. Ridiculous. But Mary could see fear flickering in his eyes. He unplugged the radio and carried it into the garage, setting it on his workbench before returning to bed. Neither of them slept for the rest of the night. Robert lay awake, listening to Mary's uneven breathing, while his own thoughts churned with dark memories he hadn't touched in years. The next morning, they barely spoke. Robert left the radio in the garage all day, but when night came, he couldn't resist. While Mary was in the shower, he sneaked out to the garage, plugged it back in, and turned the knob. At first, only static hissed through the speakers. Then, slowly, a voice emerged, soft and distorted. Robert, can you hear me? His heart slammed against his ribs. The voice was female, muffled, but somehow familiar. He leaned closer, eyes wide. Who is this? He whispered, though he felt foolish talking to static. I see you. I know what you did. Robert jerked back, his hands trembling. He reached for the power cord to unplug it, but the radio suddenly blared a sharp crackle that filled the garage with deafening noise. He yanked the plug from the socket. Silence fell once more. Breathing heavily, he carried the radio back into the house. Mary was waiting in the living room, her hair damp and her face pale. She looked at him with tears brimming in her eyes. Why? Did you bring it back in here? She asked, her voice breaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he placed it gently on the shelf, staring at it as if expecting it to burst into flames. At night, they locked their bedroom door, but neither of them felt safe. The whispers returned, louder than before, curling around their bed like invisible snakes. I see you. I know what you did. Confess, confess. Mary buried her face in the pillow, sobbing silently. Robert lay beside her, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, the memories of his past swirling in his mind like vultures circling a carcass. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the radio whispered. And for the first time in decades, Robert felt truly afraid. Morning arrived gray and hollow. The world outside their window looked lifeless under the heavy clouds. Robert brewed coffee without saying a word. His hands trembled as he lifted the mug to his lips, and black drops spilled onto the tablecloth. Mary sat across from him, eyes sunken staring at nothing. Neither spoke about the whispers last night, but their silence was heavy with fear. After breakfast, Robert retreated to the living room, staring at the radio sitting innocently on the shelf. Its polished wood gleamed under the dim morning light. He almost expected it to grin at him. He turned away quickly, pressing his palms to his temples. His head throbbed with restless guilt and memories. Mary spent the day cleaning the kitchen, again and again, scrubbing the same countertops until her knuckles were raw. She felt a tremor deep in her chest, like something was cracking inside her. Every so often, she glanced down the hallway towards the living room, certain she could hear faint whispers even in daylight. When evening came, they ate dinner in silence. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock above them, each second echoing like a hammer against bone. Robert barely touched his food. Mary forced herself to chew, though each bite tasted like ash. That night, neither dared to turn on the radio. They unplugged it, wrapped its cord around the base, and placed it under an old wool blanket. But as midnight came, the whispering began. Again, soft at first. "I see you. I know what you did. Confess. Confess." Mary clutched Robert's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Please, make it stop." He didn't answer. He was frozen, staring at the bedroom ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. The voice grew louder, slithering through the walls, curling around them like icy chains. "Confess, confess." Then the voice shifted. It was no longer distant and distorted. It was clear, human, female, familiar. Robert, do you remember me?" His heart stopped. Mary turned to him, eyes wide with terror. "Who is that? Rob? Who is that?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The voice laughed softly, the sound dripping with malice. "Tell her, Robert. Tell her about me. Tell her about that night, or I'll drag you down to where I burn." Mary gripped his shoulders, shaking him. What is she talking about? He felt his soul crack open, a wound he'd sealed shut for decades tearing apart under her gaze. Tears pooled in his eyes. I didn't mean to. It was so long ago. Tell me." She screamed out. The whispering grew louder, filling every corner of the room. "Confess, confess, confess." Robert buried his face in his hands. It was before we met. I was drunk. She was a waitress at Murphy's Tavern. I offered her a ride home. I didn't see the deer. The car slid off the road. She wasn't moving. I panicked. I just left her there. Mary recoiled from him as if he'd struck her. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. You left her to die?" "I didn't know what to do," he sobbed. "I was scared. I was young. No one ever found out." The voice laughed again, cold and hollow. "I never left you, Robert. I've been waiting, watching. You will pay for what you did." Mary screamed, pressing her hands against her ears, but the voice only grew louder. "Confess, confess." Robert fell to his knees, sobbing so hard his ribs ached. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, leave us alone." The whispering paused. For a moment, the room fell silent except for their ragged breathing. Then the voice spoke again, softer, almost tender. Too late. Suddenly, the radio, still wrapped under the blanket in the living room, crackled. TO Life with a deafening screech. The sound tore through the walls, vibrating the floorboards under their feet. Mary shrieked. Robert clutched his ears, the pain piercing his skull. The lights flickered violently, casting wild shadows that danced across the walls. The air turned freezing cold, so cold that their breath came out in thick white clouds. Then, in the midst of the static roar, came a scream. A woman's scream, high-pitched and agonized, echoing from the radio down the hallway. It rose to a fever pitch, so loud that the windows rattled in their frames. Mary fell to the floor, covering her head. Robert crawled towards the bedroom door, sobbing uncontrollably. The scream abruptly stopped. Silence fell, heavy and unnatural. The only sound was the blood pounding in their ears. Slowly, Robert forced himself to stand. Mary cowered behind him, clutching his robe. Together, they crept down the hallway towards the living room. The radio sat on the shelf, the blanket half slid off, the dial glowing a deep, hellish red. The knobs turned on their own, clicking back and forth. Static filled the room, and beneath it, the voice spoke again. "I see you. I know what you did. Confess, or burn with me." Robert fell to his knees before it. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he pressed his forehead to the cold wooden casing. "I confess. I confess I killed you. I left you there to die. Please, forgive me." The radio fell silent. The glow from the dial faded into darkness. For a moment, all they heard was their own sobbing. Mary backed away, staring at her husband with hollow eyes. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say, but as they sat in that silence, hoping it was over, neither noticed the faint echo that lingered in the static-filled shadows. "Confess, or burn with me." And somewhere deep, within the circuitry, a smile flickered across the void. The days after Robert's confession passed in a blur of silence and fear. Mary no longer spoke to him. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes vacant, her movements mechanical. Robert spent most of his time in the living room, sitting in his armchair, staring at the radio on the shelf. It was unplugged, its cord coiled neatly around its base, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it again. He hoped the nightmare was over. But each night, as darkness fell and the wind howled, through the pine trees outside, he felt her presence. Sometimes it was a faint whisper curling around his ear. Other times it was the sound of sobbing, echoing from deep within the radio's wooden casing. Mary avoided the living room entirely. She slept in the guest bedroom, locking the door every night, pressing her pillow over her head to block out the whispers she could still hear. Her dreams were filled with images of a woman lying broken on a roadside, her eyes glazed with death, her mouth open in a silent scream. On the third night after his confession, Robert snapped. He woke at 3:07 a.m., drenched in sweat, his heart thundering against his ribs. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Slowly, he rose from bed and shuffled towards the living room. His bare feet cold against the wooden floor dot, the radio sat there, dark and silent. With trembling hands he grabbed it, ignoring the chill that seeped into his skin through the wood. He carried it out into the backyard, placing it on the cold grass under the pale light of the crescent moon. The wind rustled the branches above him, whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. He raised his hammer high above his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, he hesitated. The radio looked so harmless sitting there, its knobs glinting faintly like golden eyes. Then, with a strangled cry, he brought the hammer down. The wood splintered under the blow, cracking with a sharp, satisfying sound. He struck again and again, smashing the casing into jagged pieces, breaking the speaker mesh, shattering the glowing dial. Each strike sent shards flying into the grass, but he didn't stop until his arms burned and tears blurred his vision. Finally, he fell to his knees, panting, staring at the wreckage before him. The radio lay in ruins, its wires spilling out like tangled guts. For the first time in days, he felt relief. He stumbled back inside, leaving the broken pieces scattered across the lawn. Mary watched from the kitchen window, her face pale and expressionless. She said nothing as he walked past her, disappearing into their bedroom. That night, they slept in silence. No whispers came, no screams, just the quiet, heavy darkness of an old house holding its breath. When morning came, Robert woke to the scent of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Mary stood at the counter, her back to him, stirring her cup slowly. He sat at the table, rubbing his eyes. "It's over," he said softly, almost to himself. "I destroyed it." Mary didn't respond. She poured his coffee and set it in front of him without meeting his eyes. He sipped it in silence, letting the warmth seep into his bones. But as he set the cup down, he froze. From the living room, he heard it, a faint crackle. His blood turned to ice. Slowly, he rose from his chair and stepped into the hallway. The living room was bathed in weak morning light. There, on the shelf where the radio had sat, was nothing, but the crackling continued. Then he heard her voice. "Robert?" He spun around, searching for the source. The voice echoed again, this time louder, clearer. "I see you. I know what you did." His eyes darted around the room, heart hammering against his ribs. Then he saw it. The television screen flickered to life, though it wasn't plugged in. Static danced across the glass, and within the swirling black and white fuzz, he saw her. Face dot pale, broken, eyes glazed with death. Blood trickled from her temple, dripping down her cheek in thick black rivulets. Her mouth opened, revealing shattered teeth, and she screamed, "Confess or burn with me." Robert fell backwards, onto the floor, clutching his chest. Pain ripped through him, sharp and searing. Mary ran into the room, gasping when she saw the television. Tears streamed down her face as she fell to her knees beside him. Rob, what's happening?" His eyes were wide with terror, locked on the flickering screen. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his lips blue. The pain spread through his chest, seizing his heart in a cold, unbreakable grip. The woman's face on the screen twisted into a hideous grin. Her voice slithered through the static. "You can't break me. I live in your guilt forever." With a final gasp, Robert's body went limp. His eyes glazed over, staring blankly at the ceiling. Mary sobbed, shaking him, screaming his name. But he was gone. The television flickered once, then went dark. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, from the kitchen radio behind Mary, came a faint whisper. "I see you. I know what you did." Mary turned, her blood running cold as the voice grew louder, closer, until it filled the entire house with its echoing malice. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, carrying with it the whispers of the dead Dot inside. The curse lived on Dot forever.